Okay, next, let's talk about when you want to use an auction format listing. You want to use an auction format listing when your pre-sale research tells you that there's good or very high demand for the item. You see, auctions are best for high demand items. When you've got high demand items, you've got a lot of people searching for that item, and therefore, when they see that item at a low auction starting price, which is what I recommend that you do, they're going to place their bid on that item. And then other people will also place their bid. Suddenly, you've got a dog pile of people bidding on that item and starting a bidding frenzy. And that's when an auction listing really shines. Number two is when there are not many of this same item on eBay relative to the number of buyers. This is just another way of saying that the item is in high demand and there's low supply. Number three, when you're selling an item that does not have a lot of competition. In other words, there aren't other providers selling the same item. Now, you can't say this for a lot of products on eBay. You have to really be looking at the collectibles, the antiques, and other high demand areas to be able to really look at items that don't have a lot of competition, items that don't have a lot of supply, and items where there is high demand. There are all kinds of areas, though, in that category of collectibles and in the category of antiques. There are massive, massive, and tons of subcategories within just those two categories. So keep in mind that this is where auctions really shine, in the high demand world. And I don't mean they have to be an incredibly high demand, something that, is just unfindable. I just mean that they have to be different than the commodity type of items that you would normally buy, let's say on Amazon. DVDs or iPods or iPhones or things like that that are everywhere. What we're looking for in an auction listing is something that is particularly unusual, hard to find, and therefore is in high demand. So let me go over some tips for correctly listing an auction. I've done thousands upon thousands of auctions over the years, so I know a few things about how to correctly list an auction. First of all, you want to set the opening bid low relative to its ending price. This is counterintuitive because most people think, oh, I don't want to lose money, so I'm going to set my bid high so that I don't lose money. Well, the opposite is actually true. If the item is a high demand item, what you're going to do is set the opening bid very low. A lot of my collectible Hot Wheels cars, I would start at $9.95, even if that car was expected to sell for $500 or $1,000 or $2,000. And by the way, there are collectible Hot Wheels that sell for $2,000. I sold one once for $3,000. I sold one for $9,800. So you set the opening bid low relative to its ending price. And by the way, the one that I sold for $9,800, I started it at $9.95. Why? Because, like I said, this is the best way to get people jumping into the auction and bidding and excited about the item because they feel like, man, there's a chance here I could get a real screaming bargain. If nobody else finds the auction, if nobody else bids against me, I've got it for $9.95. So you're appealing to people's sense of greed. You're appealing to people's sense of excitement about possibly getting an incredible deal. That's why we set the opening bid low. If you set the opening bid high, what happens is it's so close to its actual price or its actual value that nobody gets excited about it, or they make a mental note that they're going to come back towards the end of the auction and bid on it and then forget. So you end up with a lot of auctions that don't end up closing, and you end up losing a lot of money in fees as well. So that's tip number one. The next tip is do not use a reserve. So what is a reserve? A reserve is an amount that you set. It's almost like a protection that you set that if the auction doesn't reach that amount, you're not going to sell it for that. So let's say, for example, I have an item that I want to sell and I want to get at least $200 for it. You could set the reserve at $200, but here's what happens when you use a reserve. People get into the bidding, right? They'll bid on the item. Let's say that you started off at $9.95. they'll place their first bid, and it'll be at $10.49, and then somebody else will place another bid, and it'll be at $10.99. For example, let's say that they're using 50-cent bid increments. Each time somebody bids at that low amount, eBay is telling them your bid did not meet the reserve. Please try again. You know, it doesn't take very many of these bids and receiving that negative message before people give up and they stop bidding altogether. So what a reserve does is it depresses bidding activity. It makes it so people don't want to bid anymore because they don't see any end to it. They feel like, man, what is it going to take for me to reach the reserve? It really goes against creating a bidding frenzy and goes against getting people emotionally excited about your product. So for that reason, I don't use reserves. The next tip is do not use a buy it now option along with the auction. Okay, when you set an auction, you know, in an auction listing format, you also have the ability to add in a buy it now price. And what that does is it allows for people to buy it immediately, you know, unless the auction reaches a certain level. That also has the same effect as having a reserve. It depresses bidding activity. It doesn't get people excited. And every once in a while, you'll get somebody who will just buy it now, which is great, and you'll do okay with it. But in most cases, it's really a wasted opportunity, and it also wastes some of your eBay fees as well. Here's another tip. Use a 7-day listing at the minimum unless you know the item is in very high demand. Then a 3-day or a 1-day is okay. But especially with collectibles and antiques, I like the auction to run about 7 days or 10 days. And the reason for that is I want the most exposure for that item possible. And often in a 1-day listing, you can't get that type of exposure. Unless, again, you know people are constantly searching for that item on eBay and it's in very, very extremely high demand. Now, collectibles are also in high demand, but they may not be as high of demand, or you may just want to be sure that everyone in the collector community gets a chance to see it through a 7-day listing. So let's take a look at tips for correctly listing an auction. You want to run your auctions from Sunday evening to Sunday evening. Why? Because this is the time frame when most people are home and they're relaxing in front of the computer. You know, typically on weekends, people are busy running around doing things, fun things. You know, they're going outside, they're going out to dinner, they're doing all kinds of things on the weekend that they can't do during the week. During the week, it's been proven there's just less activity in general than on a Sunday evening on eBay. You also want to run your auctions from about 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to about 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This allows the entire country to potentially see your auctions closing. Okay? And that's important. You want to be within that window of time. If I'm on the West Coast, I'm in California, sometime between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. is ideal. And therefore, on the East Coast, it would be that your auctions close between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. Eastern Time. And that just means that most of the people are up, most of the people are still awake, and most of the people still have a chance to see your listing or your auction come to a close, because most of the activity in an auction is at the very end of the auction. People jump in at the very end, trying to outbid each other. And oftentimes they kind of save the auction for themselves in their mind, and they come in at the very end to go ahead and try to win it at the very, very end. And then if you're running several auctions of similar items like I do when I list a bunch of vintage Hot Wheels cars, I know that my audience for one of these vintage Hot Wheels cars is probably also going to be interested in all my other listings that I also put up. When you have that situation, be sure that you cross-sell your other items with a statement within each listing by saying something like this. If you like Star Wars figures, or in my case, if you like vintage Hot Wheels, check out all my other listings on eBay today. Just click on See Other Items in the upper right corner of this listing, just below my username. And by the way, you can also put a link within each listing to each of your other eBay listings or to all of your other eBay listings. And that's a very powerful way to let people know, hey, I have other listings up right now in this similar category. Go check them out today. And this encourages people to buy multiple items from you. And that's great because it saves you hassle and time of shipping multiple items. You can just put them all in one box and ship them out. But more importantly, it really helps you to improve your sales overall, because now you've got people noticing all your other auctions and bidding on those auctions. And so overall, you're creating a bidding frenzy in general on all of your auction listings.